Hello, everybody. Welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Cherie Burton, and this is a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. Oh my goodness, you guys. I haven't even published this yet, and I'm already freaking out. This is the first podcast episode that I have ever recorded simultaneously through video. So you can go to YouTube, to my YouTube channel, and just find it. I'll put a link to the YouTube recording in the show notes because I think it's important that because I'm taking on such a heavy topic with my friend Wendy Jensen, who is a mother, a grandmother, a beautiful soul I've known over a decade, a super credentialed practitioner in her own right, and the author of the Healing Questions Guide, which is a 500 plus page reference book. The woman knows her stuff. Okay. But I just had this feeling like I needed to push record video at the same time that we started. And I had no idea that it was going to be an hour and 40-minute episode. So you might have to listen to this in stages. And I was going to break it up into two parts, but I was like, you know what? No, it needs full context. So I know that this is a controversial and loaded topic, but I refuse to stay silent on it anymore. Where is the boundary between a woman's own spiritual sovereignty and the obedient compliance to the policies and rules of her church? Where do those lines blur? Where do they get gray? So yeah, it's heavy, it's deep, it's taking on big patriarchy to a degree. And so we're indignant and we're passionate and we're sincere. Those of us women who are in the healing space, who want to stay lined up with God, who are sincerely wanting to help suffering souls get the help they need, wherever they can find it. It's that simple. There's this aspect to the spiritual gift expression of women and how that, is typically not a safe space to play out. And what is it even in religion? So it's really up for me right now because I have well over, 15-ish years playing in the space of energy psychology, multiple modalities of healing. You guys know I get super weird on this podcast, right? Like I go deep. I talk about things that you're not sitting in Sunday school learning about. But the reason that I felt so called to go into these deep arenas of the ancient feminine arts, you could say, Mother Earth, gifts of the earth, is because I wasn't being served this in the walls of my religion in church. I'm not saying it's not a beautiful space to be in church, but there's so much more. And I know thousands of women. My heritage is Mormonism. But I know thousands of women in multiple other religions, including Mormonism, that are doing these things. They're practicing these things and they are amazing and they're powerful, but they don't feel like they can openly talk about it in the space of this very sort of controlled environment or closed system of church. So yeah, the lines do blur a little bit because where does your own spiritual sovereignty, your own gifts, your own sacred knowing, where does that boundary between that and the obedient compliance to policies, rules, and procedures fit in? Because of some recent updates to the General Handbook of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, because some things were put into that handbook within the last month that discourage many alternative forms of healing, including energy healing, which Wendy and I will totally get into defining in this podcast. Many people will not get the help they need. And to me, that's really sad. So my fierce feminine's coming out this week, friends. Here we go. My interview with Wendy Jensen. All right, everybody, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I'm Cherie Burton, and I've got with me my dear friend, Wendy Jensen. And
excited to be here.
I'm so, it's so funny. Yesterday, I was in the bathroom getting ready, and Spirit was like, you need to do a podcast. So I was going to do a different podcast episode. And it was like, no, it needs to be on this particular thing, and you need to contact Wendy. And I was like, so I sent you a voice text, and I was like, Wendy, how about an impromptu podcast? And you were just, what was so interesting to me that I did not know, and this is how I love how Spirit flows, like you had already you were scheduled or had just been on a podcast on this very topic that I had no knowledge of. So yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's how things go, huh? When you're in the flow.
You're in the flow. And also because there's a need for some clarifying aspects of what's playing out in the space of healing with women in religion. So our religion of origin is Mormonism. I know you do you've just been such a fantastic guide in your own faith journey, transitioning out of Mormonism, going through your own faith crisis, hitting rock bottom. And I want you to talk about that because it very much kind of filters into why you even went into energy healing and why, but when you became this expert in this field and wrote this book about healing and tapping into our emotion, our inner terrain and our emotions and the energy around our emotions and our beliefs and how they affect our health, which I've dove into as well. But the fact that your book is freaking like 500 pages long, like you have a lot to say on the matter and it's a great resource. But anyway, so you now are a transition coach for those who are suffering, and I will call it suffering. Let's be honest, it's suffering when your worldview explodes, when you are in a religious setting or spiritual community and you have some level of awakening around, hey, this aspect isn't working, this place doesn't resonate, the way that I was thinking, doing, feeling, and being in this space is no longer serving me or feeding my soul. I need to go outside of this. So you've just brought that to the forefront and you're being very vocal. And I really admire that. So let's start with kind of your journey. So we're going to talk about energy healing. And I know even like saying that, a little bit of me is like, because of the old programming of that's of Satan, or, how does God fit into that? How does a church fit into that? How does the individual fit into that? So I started studying energy work and energy psychology so right after my sister committed suicide in 2005, and I knew we needed to do it a different way. And you know my story with this, maybe some of the listeners know or don't know, but I was trained in traditional science, psychology. That's my degree. I worked at a psychiatric facility. I worked at an addiction recovery center. I was trained in, hard, fast science, and even a lot of the theories, behaviorism and all of that kind of stuff. But when I saw that people weren't largely being served by traditional forms of treatment, and then lost my sister to suicide, which very much piggybacked each other, I'm like, there has to be more. There's got to be more than just this drugs and talk therapy type of scene for emotional and mental health. And so I looked and explored out of the box. So I'm going to set the stage with that because I want you to share how you weren't being served and how you got even to a place where you're like, what is this energy thing? What is that about?
So it was probably about 2005 for me also. I was struggling in my relationship with my husband. Our marriage just was not working. And I didn't realize at the time that I was living at such a high level of perfectionism that I was pretty much paralyzed in my world unless I knew exactly what I needed to do and if I could be the best at it. I mean, if I was just very stuck in my life. And that's because in the religion, I did not want to misstep because I did not want to chance losing my children in the next life. And so I wanted to live a valiant life. And we're taught in the religion that obedience is an assurity. It's protection, it's power, it's position. That obedience is what's going to keep us safe. And so I was living this
in Mormonism
life.
Yeah, in Mormonism, I believe even in the scriptures, it's the first law under heaven. It's the highest value is obedience. And then sometimes it's like obedience to what? We can get to that later, but that was a big part of my coming to terms with what am I actually obeying? Who and what am I obeying? What am I really obeying?
Well, and my question eventually became, why is obedience the first law in heaven and not love?
Yeah.
So I'm like, that was curious. But I was in that state of, the rigidity and the obedience and the perfectionism and trying to be the best mom and the best daughter of God that I possibly could be. And my marriage was falling apart. And so I was looking for answers. But I was told that the answers would be found in Relief Society and in scripture study and in prayer and obedience. And so after exhausting that and not finding the relief I was looking for, I had an aunt of mine actually give me a book. I think you have the copy of the book, Remembering Wholeness.
Yeah, got it right here.
Harold Tuttle.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, there she is.
I haven't seen her talk to her for years, but that book was a catalyst for me as well.
It was
because she is a
amazing.
Mormon woman and she was writing about something that was not talked about at that time. Largely.
Yeah, she basically told me that I was the one responsible for the chaos happening in my life. And I did not want to hear that. I thought, no, I am the obedient one. I am the one that is living all the rules. Meanwhile, I'm making the rest of my family miserable. And so it was an eye opener for me to take ownership for the energy that I was creating in my home and the rigidity and the closed off and the limitations and the control that I was trying to use to keep my family safe. My intentions were pure, but my methods were really backwards. Mm-hmm. And so in her book, she mentions that she does rapid eye technology. And so I thought, well, I'm going to find the closest rapid eye technician and I'm going to go and explore this and see if that'll work for me. And so I go into this rapid eye technician, and she's like 20 minutes away from my home, and she is LDS also. And so we had that in common. So it made me feel safe, because I didn't want to go practicing into some alternative field because I was so afraid of, getting into the occult or doing something, that my Heavenly Father wouldn't want me to do, because I've been taught it was so dangerous. But I needed more than obedience. I wanted truth and I wanted relief. Right. And so I gave myself an exception and I went into this brilliant rapid eye technician. I love her dearly to this day. This woman cracked me open, and she held such a tender space for me. And she was probably the only person that would allow me to open my heart and see the perfectionism and the superiority and the rigidity and basically pretty narcissistic traits that I was developing in this indoctrination, that I was so vulnerable to be able to admit some of those things. And she just held such a tender and compassionate space for me. And she used an eye directing device, which is like a fiberglass wand, and you move it back and forth in different directions, and it accesses different parts of the brain. The science behind it is very similar to EMDR, which is now a very common practice for people.
Many psychotherapists are using that as a modality. Yes.
Yes. So it's very, very similar to that. She also used essential oils, which I had never heard of before. And she used an eye patch because she talked about the Gainesfield view, and that when we have one eye covered, the information we receive is different, and then we start using different parts of our brain. So it's very scientific. But at the end of that day, I decided I wanted to hold space like she had held space for me. I wanted to learn what she had learned, and I wanted to do that for other people. It was that soul moment where I knew this is my path, that I want to be able to provide for others what she provided for me. It was like no question. And so I went into the field of rapid eye technology, and I got the training, and I started with one of the neighborhood friends that were in our ward, and she needed help. And after I had done a session on her with, very, I hope this works kind of thing, and all my training, I hope it works. She loved it. She came back. She wanted more. And the training had cost me a lot of money, but I charged her a very minimal amount, like a $20 for an hour and a half session. And she came back for more. And I'm like, okay, I'm so glad that I have someone that will trust me to work with them when I feel so new at this. Anyways, a year later, I get called in by the bishop, and he says, we have some people in the ward that say you're practicing witchcraft. And they're very concerned. Now, Cherie, I'm going to just be honest here.
Please. That's just...
When you got someone with a wand, an eye directing device, and she's got potions, essential oils. She's patching her eyeballs, and she's, saying what others would see as incantations. But they're really processes to help release emotional beliefs. I can see where they're coming from. See where
that would be like broken some people's long held, perceptions around what does it mean to release? What does it mean to heal? And how does this fit into my structure?
And rather than asking how come these modalities work, they automatically anchored into what they knew as witchcraft. And it's got to be witchcraft. I haven't seen anything like this before. Doesn't matter what the results are, and that person experienced peace.
Yeah. And that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in, when there's an introduction of a new way of doing something.
Yes.
And it butts up against, those long held beliefs.
Yes.
It creates dissonance, which some people label evil.
Yes. And so it broke my heart to think that I was being accused of being a witch and practicing priestcraft because I was actually charging money for sessions. I don't know if they expected me to do these for free or what. I don't know, but.
And you had been trained on it.
Yes, I had gone through the training.
Certification.
I had done the hours and the certification. And so legitimately, I don't know why anybody would expect to come in and have me do that, my trained skill for free. But needless to say, I began to doubt myself a lot. And I was like, am I allowed to do this? Am I really doing what I should do? And I had to go internally and say, is this what God wants me to do? Because there was such a structure that the church had created that says, no, you are on the wrong path. You should not do this. And now I have this evidence that other people are suspicious too. And so there was really some inner discourse going within me saying, am I on the right path? And there's, and you talk about this all the time in your podcast, but there is this inner knowing. It says you are helping people remember that time when you got that confirmation that the help that you received from this other healer is the type of help that you're offering other people. So trust in that. So I continue to practice rapid eye technology and other modalities. I learned emotion
code,
the freedom technique.
Oh, emotional freedom technique. EFT.
The tapping.
Yeah.
Yes. EFT is what it's called. I learned meditation, guided imagery, all kinds of different modalities. I took a class in Reiki and I started to understand the dynamics of energy. And I started to understand how the beliefs have a certain frequency and vibration in the body that if it is incongruent with life and love and happiness and joy and vibrance, then it starts to take a toll on our body.
Fruits of the spirit, right?
Yes.
Well, I just have to interject something here because
Sure.
I had a rapid eye after I read Carol Tuttle's book. This is where our journeys parallel. It was almost the exact same year you read it. And I looked her up personally because I live in Utah. She lives in Utah. And I actually hired her to do a series of rapid eye sessions with myself and my husband. And it rocked my world too.
Yeah.
And anyway, I wanted to insert that the misconception around these practices that aren't done en masse, that aren't done by the medical community, the long held structures of, Western medicine, if you want to say that. And also lending itself to like, how does a religious structure, also a long held traditional structure, why would we'll get to this later, but why do we automatically put those two together? Like that your religion should be the final say on whether or not these scientific, physical, healing modalities work or not. That's like telling them to understand quantum mechanics and rocket science when their domain is spiritual leadership. Right. So anyway, just keep going because I'm right there with you.
No, I like this question that you're asking here because it's a very important piece because I was leaning on my religious beliefs and making my religious authorities my inner authority. And that's where the doubt came in. And that is the first time I went inward and said, do I have permission to do this? Is this good? Is it a right path for me? And it kind of put me into a state of, I want to know the science behind this. And I started to study quantum mechanics and quantum healing and quantum different healing arts. And so, because I wanted to understand the energy, and now the whole world is really aware of the string theory and quantum physics. And we're talking about everything is energy.
Everything's energy.
Everything is energy. And so I didn't let that church deter me. In fact, if anything, I dug my heels in and said, no, I know this is my path. And people who are calling me on the carpet, it's because they are not educated and they have not done the research, the hours and hours of research that I had done to validate that I had permission to do this.
Yeah.
And so I continued on that path, and I started writing the Healing Questions Guide. And that's my little tattered book here. Probably turn around too. But basically it's understanding, asking questions to intercept and interrupt toxic dialogue in your mind, to activate healing in the body and allow more energy to flow through your body.
Which is exactly what Jesus did. He is the master of inquiry. And we'll get to him later, because he very much in his wisdom teachings, and he's been misconstrued and misquoted, but he was always encouraging people to go within.
Yes.
Always.
And to ask questions.
Through inquiry. Yes.
And to be so very curious. And I can't think of any other modality that's more conducive to, building becoming your own authority than to ask those inner questions, and asking myself that inner question, can I do this? Is this the right path for me? That was that self-inquiry. I had to have the confirmation for myself. But after I'd finished, this was like a 3-year project of coming up with the different beliefs that are associated with physical symptoms manifesting in the body. And my goal was to help people bypass that ego mind, interrupt those patterns, and be able to open a dialogue with them and their higher self, using questions I didn't think to ask because they didn't know that it was associated with the physical manifestation in their body. Mm-hmm. And by the end of that, what I realized is that so much ailment in our body is caused because we develop a contempt against the self. Mm-hmm. And that contempt against the self creates the initial sickness. And so I realized that the reason I had the rigidity, the reason that I had the self-loathing, was because of some of the doctrines that I had been taught as a child. It was really confusing because I'm taught I'm a child of God, I'm a daughter of God, and I'm very loved. I was also taught that someone had to die for me in order to be in my human condition. And I was taught that, I needed to be in a constant state of repentance in case I missed some sins, or there was no grace taught in LDS doctrine. And so it's very, became very rigid.
Yeah. And what you described earlier about how, you would move through these patterns of rigidity and I relate to that, by the way. I'm not saying this is just you, this is a big thing.
Oh, it's a problem.
There's a perfectionistic nature to trying to do everything just right. Did I miss? Okay, I didn't get this blessing, or I didn't get this insight, or something's lacking in my life. What did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Maybe if I upped my devotional practices or whatever, it's like, oh, I didn't get that thing, and I'm not feeling this resonation. Therefore, what's wrong with me? Where do I, not like the system is flawed, or the practice is flawed, or the premises behind it are a little skewed, but it's me.
Right. Something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so maybe if I just read scriptures, an extra 5 minutes a day, maybe if, there's got to be some event in my life I have not yet forgiven, and you're just in this constant state of insufficiency.
Yeah.
Trying to qualify to feel the love of the divine and to be accepted within the divine. And that is.
So when you have a religious structure, which Mormonism is, that is very much policy-based, administration focused, I want to say bureaucratized, but some people would argue that, where there's some exactness, there's not a lot of room for nuance. You very much can develop a performance-based worth sort of mindset,
yes,
as opposed to that grace you're talking about. And so when you are heavily checklisting and obeying and trying to get it all, did I miss something? Let me go back through these materials and see where I'm going wrong, right? Versus, no, what's flowing to me now? What grace is presenting itself in my humanness that isn't allowing? And some could argue, hey, there's nothing wrong with repentance. There's nothing wrong with fasting and prayer. And we're not saying that there's anything wrong with those things. They're very edifying. But when you're attaching your personal worth to a practice, that there's a specific outcome or a tokenized value exchange, and your worth is tied into that, that's where it becomes very, very psychologically damaging and emotionally stunting.
And I would also include in that everything I was doing was for a next life.
Yeah.
In hopes that my next life, I would experience the happiness that I was missing. In the next life, I would hope that I would have the joy in my marriage if I could just stick it out. Which now I see for us to perform in this life in order to secure us happiness in the next life is so misguided.
Yeah.
Our desire to work and work and work so hard to qualify for the love of God is so confusing.
We can
to think that God is somewhere out there where there's been something within here, that God is in the next life.
And that you have to be worthy
now.
To be in his presence.
Yes.
And that's like you said, it's a dangling carrot for what's possible if you do everything right, as opposed to, what if we just broke that whole thing open and you're already there. You're already in his presence. And I would add her presence.
Yes.
That it's so immediate and it's not based on your worthiness.
Right.
It's based on the fact you exist. So you went through, you dove deep into quantum mechanics of healing and understanding how we hold belief in the body, how that creates sickness. So where does energy itself, because I would love for you to define that as you continue to talk about your journey. Like, what did you come to understand that it was? Because I had a perception of what energy was back, I don't know, when I first heard about it. Like, it was very like eerie and creepy and supernatural.
Yeah. No, that was for me too.
And so it's evolved for me. But at first I was like, what is this? Like, why couldn't you use Christ and energy in the same sentence and not have that dissonance happening?
Yeah. So the definition I don't remember where I found this, somewhere on the internet, but I agree with it and it sounds true to me. And that is energy healing. What do we have? The definition of energy healing. And that is defined as modalities that help to balance the energy throughout the body to alleviate stress, ailments, and disease, including psychological imbalances.
Okay, say that first part again.
It is any modality that helps you to balance energy throughout the body and alleviate stress, ailments, and disease, including psychological imbalances.
Okay, so I see it as like kind of catalyzing, because we know energy has emotion. It's energy in motion. There's a charge. It's physics. My son Sawyer is taking a physics class in college right now, just barely started. And I was looking at his notes the other day. Physics, very first thing in his notes, is something about the study of energy exchange from one object to another or something like that. Like, it's physics. It is science. Yes. It's long held science, right? So I love this part, the very first part of remembering wholeness. She said, everything in its finest level of creation is energy. Everything at its finest level of creation is energy. We are exchanging energy and silently communicating energetically with every person we meet or come in contact with. Energy impressions are always our first impressions that influence what we think or feel about others. So when we're talking about energy healing, I think it's healing that people are really afraid of. And I had somebody confront me with that. They're like, when we were talking about like, how does this fit into the gospel, this whole energy thing and whatever. And it's like, people are so afraid of healing, and that's why they're not getting healed. First of all, there's a misconception of what it is, the word energy and the word healing. It's not fixing. It's not like permanent fixing. It could be, but that's such a subjective stance to take. Like, you're healed. Like forever, you're going to be, rainbows, butterflies, and sunshine, right? So let's explore that a little bit as it relates to your journey, where you got to the point where you're like, okay, there's something really good about this. It's changed my life. I now have the desire, which is a natural extension of if something works for you, you're going to bring it to the space of wanting to bring it to a larger group of people because you care about people. So you made that jump like already super fast. I want to help people. So you got certified, and I'm assuming you started to see more and more fruits, the tree bearing fruit. Like, this is good.
Clients that were saying for traditional, I've been in traditional psychology for 20 years, and I've had 3 sessions with you, and you have shifted more for me and helped me understand things at a whole different level that is absolutely changed my life. And so that's those results were letting me know that what I was doing was worthy, that it was good. Now, to the point that you say that everybody's afraid of healing, is there a proper way to heal?
Right. What does that even mean?
You healed, whether it was by the devil or it was by a quack or what the point is, you healed and you feel better and you feel whole. And
you're more connected to God and however you frame that. To me, that is the gem. And the gauge and the test, does it bring you closer to those fruits of the Spirit and or God? Love, joy, temperance, meekness, patience, faith, right? Does it bring you closer to those good vibes, good feelings, or is it making you go into doubt? So when I see a declarative statement, what's interesting about the irony of this and what prompted this whole episode is the recent statement by LDS church leaders in the Handbook. I don't know who said it, where, nobody's quoted directly, that energy healing is not, well, we can read the exact thing, but when you make a declarative statement that is supposed to blanket all healing, when you don't parse out what that is and you put the word energy healing in quotes. Yeah, go ahead and read that and then we'll talk about it.
So, and this is chapter 38. And
by the way, this just came out December 20th or something like that, 2020. Yeah.
And so it is chapter 38. It's under church policies and guidelines, and it's under medical. It says church members are discouraged from seeking miraculous or supernatural healing from an individual or group that claims to have special methods for accessing healing power outside of prayer and properly performed priesthood blessings. These practices are often referred to as energy healing. Other names are also used. Such promises for healing are often given in exchange for money. So the problem that I have with that is that it discourages members from seeking any kind of healing power outside of prayer and priesthood. So pretty much
just that phrase, properly performed, what is the percentage in the vernacular and the context of what they're saying? What is the percentage of qualified people to heal people? Because this is male priesthood holders. If they're going into properly performed, and I can give another quote by a Mormon apostle that really triggered me a couple of years ago, where this same thing was reiterated. If it's not somebody who is a priesthood holder,
a worthy priesthood holder, properly practicing his priesthood.
Those are the only people qualified to heal. And their method of a priesthood blessing is the only modality that should be sought out to heal. And so that disqualifies, that whole statement that you just read, disqualifies miracles, because read that first part again about miraculous.
So anyone seeking miraculous or supernatural healing.
Who of us are not? I believe in miracles.
Well, we are encouraged to believe in miracles as members of the church because we expect a miracle whenever we have a priesthood blessing. That is a supernatural and miraculous thing that we are expecting to have happen. And what they're saying is those things can only happen within the scope of a priesthood blessing. Otherwise, if they happen outside that scope, that's coming from some other source that we don't approve of.
And what's interesting about this, and you had mentioned this on the other podcast that I listened to when you were sharing, like there is here in Utah, which is predominantly Mormon. And I would say this is across the board, but especially here in Utah, there seems to be a mecca of spiritual, how do I say this? Like women trained in various healing modalities, and men too, but it's largely been women who've been driving this, and it's, I kind of jumped on this bandwagon probably 15 years ago, right about the time that I read Remembering Wholeness, because I was trying to understand energy psychology. And it could be like a point could be made that like the reason that that's happening is because, and in Mormonism, it's really pronounced because we're, like you said, we are programmed and indoctrinated to expect miracles after certain things are done, right? After you have a certain level of faith, after you've done these spiritual practices, then maybe you'll qualify for a miracle, not accounting for grace. But aside from that, like, that supernatural, if you want to call it, way of accessing healing is so intriguing to members of our faith because, Christ did that. Like he spontaneously healed people and so we want that as women so desperately, but we don't have the priesthood. And so it's forced this underground sort of movement for women trying to access or be legitimized in their gifts. And maybe they go get certified, maybe they don't. So do you want to speak to that a little bit and how what you've seen?
Because the culture and the doctrine kind of breeds this in women. For one, the reason I went into energy work, because I was not getting relief from the strategies that I was promised would give me relief. And the religiosity and the scrupulosity that I was using to try and get that relief, I knew I had done everything I could possibly do, and it just kept getting worse. So I became desperate. I needed an alternative to what I was told. And so when I find this and it works, how can it be bad?
And did it draw you closer to God? Did you feel the Spirit
Absolutely.
more? You came into your more of your own.
In my life,
yeah.
I felt this generous love for no other reason than I was figuring out a way to let it in through my facilitator. She helped me and guided me into the place to feel this tremendous love. Yeah. There was not a scripture read. There was not a hymn read. There was not even a prayer given. And she was able to do this for me because she was skilled at her craft.
And let's just be honest, there are many quackeries out there, which has given it a bad name. And we'll talk about that in a sec, because I think that it's important that what you just said, like she was skilled.
Yes.
She had the correct training.
Yes.
She was effective. She was out of her ego, because that's another thing. You'll go to certain kinds of healers or practitioners, and it's all about them, all about what they know.
Yes.
The best healers and mentors are those who guide people into their own knowing. They don't prescribe a certain set of like, this is what you should believe. And religions do that. Religions do that.
They tell you what to believe rather than to
into your own knowing, rather than go into your own knowing.
Right. And a true teacher shows you where to look, but they don't tell you what to see.
Mm.
And by doing that, she gave me permission to trust my inner knowing. And it was almost for the first time I had tapped into my intuitive powers with giving myself permission to be somewhere outside of the box. Mm-hmm. And so for me, this policy that is now instigated at the end of 2020, it is so backwards.
Are we living in like the 1600s? Like
I can't.
It was so triggering for so many women I know, both faithful, active members of the Mormon church and those outside of that, and people everywhere in between. And it's not just a Mormon problem. This is evangelicals, Protestants, Catholicism. I think the Catholic Church just barely made a statement. I want to say very recently, within the last couple of weeks, nope, we're not ready for women to be priests yet, which is a whole other thing, right? But it's still sending this message in religions that women can't be official. Their gifts can't be an official whether it's healing or administration or leadership.
Yes.
It's only to other women and children. It's never for the whole body of the church, right? So it forces us into this underground where we don't want to feel seedy and shady because we feel the fruits of the spirit. We feel it's getting, I'm here to tell you, had I not dove into energy psychology, I might not be on the earth. I might not be functioning. Like
I
having
agree with
a sister, like an aunt and a sister that committed suicide, another sister who was on her way to commit suicide, these patterns perpetuating and perpetuating. And it's like, you know what? Out with the old, in with the new. There's got to be a fresh way. And I went to God and I said, look, I don't care how weird it is. I just want to break these patterns. I'm a mother and I'm also a practitioner in my own way, right? I was doing group therapy and I was a coach. So it's like, show me. But when I got into that rigid, oh, this isn't approved, or, what would the committees think? Then it just shut down that knowing that I had and that excitement and that divine spark to keep exploring and excavating. What is this energy thing? Mm-hmm. So energy, as I see it, is light. And it could be darkness too. And there is a whole spectrum. But it's almost like the light of Christ, or they call it a Christed energy, which I feel like is the mode of healing. It is what activates, and you could call it so many things because there's probably people listening to this who aren't Christian, but it's an activated, you could say it's got a charge to it, but it rides on the frequencies of light.
And vibration.
Yes. And vibration. So, and it is physics. It's not woo-woo, fairy. So to have a correlated committee put into the handbook, oh, this whole energy healing thing, like, it's so ignorant.
Yeah, it's like you have this body of bureaucratic and corporation-oriented men who are deciding, because they don't understand the dynamics of energy, that it must be something wrong and it must be something deceitful or priestcraft-like. And so
because money is involved, right?
Yeah.
But we pay money to this organization for it's a priesthood administration.
That's a whole
I just want to,
when
I read this part because I want to bookmark that, but I want to read, this is from, so backtrack 3 years ago, I'm sitting, so every 6 months, the Mormon Church, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has a general conference where the prophet and his 2 counselors and the 12 apostles and some of the other general leaders and maybe a couple women talk to the membership of the church, and it's broadcast and it's a big thing and people just like kind of wait for it, and it can be so edifying, uplifting, and beautiful. And occasionally something will get dropped as a statement where it just kind of clunks. And so I want to read, this is M. Russell Ballard in October of 2017, talking, and I don't know how it came around to it because the name of the talk is called The Trek Continues. And the trek meaning, pioneers who trekked across and sacrificed everything. And I personally have that heritage in my DNA.
Me too.
My pioneer Mormon ancestors came over, they lost children. I mean, it's just a beautiful, faithful story of which I'm so grateful for that heritage. Because I feel like what we're doing, Wendy, is pioneering, right?
I agree.
We are pioneering. So this is what he says. He goes, today I repeat earlier counsel from church leaders. Brothers and sisters, keep the doctrine of Christ pure and never be deceived by those who tamper with the doctrine. And then he goes on and talks about, do not listen to those who have not been ordained and or set apart to their church calling and are not acknowledged by common consent of the members of the church. And that, as a standalone statement, that doesn't seem very harming. But then when you read the whole thing in context, it's a little disconcerting. And this is where it clunked for me. Be aware of organizations, groups, or individuals claiming secret answers to questions they say that today's apostles and prophets don't have or don't understand. Don't listen to those who entice you with get-rich-quick schemes. So there's all that. But what really clunked is like, in some places, too many of our people are looking beyond the mark and seeking secret knowledge in expensive and questionable practices to provide healing and support. We urge church members to be cautious about participating in any group that promises in exchange for money miraculous healings or claims to have special methods for accessing healing power. And this is where it gets, I'm going to say this again, miraculous healings or that claims to have special methods for accessing healing power outside of properly ordained priesthood holders. So basically it just disqualified women's healing altogether.
Right.
Any healing claim, any special method, like you just talked about, rapid eye technology, we could say Reiki, we could say anything there, right? Anything.
Well, let's talk about that just a minute.
Properly ordained priesthood holders only means Mormon male men giving blessings. That's the context of this. So,
and it dismisses when you claim that everything in the field of energy healing includes hundreds of modalities, both ancient and modern, that are being tested by science and they're getting researched in their respective fields. It includes things like yoga, meditation, acupuncture,
all of that is quantum healing. All of that is energy. Polarity.
And there are so many things that they are finding scientific proof and evidence that it does.
And Wendy, where this triggers both of us, and I think what prompted this conversation is like, I am afraid for people who could truly be served.
Yes.
By all of the methods you just laid out, and there are hundreds more.
Yes.
Who would take this counsel from church leaders, and it's not just happening within Mormonism patriarchy, it's happening in a lot of other religious spaces.
Yeah.
That they could otherwise, they could be so greatly served and put it to the side or eschew it in favor of being obedient to their leaders. And that it must be Jesus and God saying this because it came down through this way. So I don't dare. There were so many people after he gave this talk that literally renounced their practice.
Yes.
And all people that were being served, a lot of people that had been the recipient of those practices were like, wait, like that really helped me. I don't know how to place what this apostle just said. Like that really actually helped me.
Well, and that the thing is that religions have relegated anything that they don't understand or don't comprehend or haven't researched and studied as an occult practice, a Satanism, or at best pseudoscience. And so they don't, like you have this group of bureaucratic men who are in there saying, well, I don't understand energy healing. It must be some magical,
well, because there's a few
thing.
Quacks, there's a few people, and I'm going to bring, I hate to use the word quack, and I'm not going to mention their names, but there are some energy people within the Mormon space who've become high profile because of some really bad press of some things that happened, and they had a kind of a cult following, if you will, and they still do. Yes. They've been excommunicated. And so it's like they're taking those quack examples and they're making a general blanket statement that all of it must be bad because look over here at what, and this doesn't fit into the priesthood. And so it's just kind of like this, when I literally shrank like this when I heard him say this talk, literally I was like, he just punched me in the gut energetically because he just disempowered by that statement all of the healing gifts of women. So how does an empowered feminine leader heal in the space of this church? How can she be visible in that? And I'm not saying she should be ordained to the priesthood. I'm not saying that. It could be argued she should be, but that's whoever you talk to. I'm just saying, can we open this up a little bit outside ordained male priesthood leaders and medical professionals, which is what he goes on to say in the rest of this article.
So here's the big thing is I don't think the church has a clue the vast scope of women healers that live even in Utah. I don't think they have a clue. And many of these women who are smart enough and have taken their own sovereignty and reclaimed their own authority are still going to practice it. That statements like that, they know it's uneducated. They know that what they're doing is right. So they continue the practice, but they don't step up in a place of defying authority. They're not going to stop. but they're not going to come out and blatantly challenge it.
That's it. So
like
when
I are right now,
yeah,
I am not afraid of that, to call it out.
You're not. And I actually became certified in something called perfect healing in Hawaii a few years ago. Most of the women that I was trained with were Mormon women, active. And it was like, oh, well, it's kind of like, we knew we kind of had to go underground. And what's interesting is that, like you're saying, there's a lot of Mormon women who have been trained in this, and I don't think that it's reached the upper echelons of, the brethren, the men, the male hierarchy of the Mormon leadership. I don't think they have a clue. So of how many women are practicing this under the radar, and that how many people it's actually helped heal and bring them back into the church setting in a way that they can exist in that church setting and not go crazy.
But here's the thing. Women healers know their religious boundaries. They know how to articulate and communicate in a way that it doesn't put up red flags.
Yes.
And the reason they've done this is because they have done their research with a fine-tooth comb to validate that this is what was happening at Christ's time. This is what Christ invited us to do. This is what's actually going on scientifically. And energy has no boundaries. Energy does not honor religious limitations. Yeah. And they know this, but they also know the vernacular. They know the triggers. They know what all of these things so that they can communicate it in a way that keeps it within the periphery of the church. But once you leave the boundaries of the church and you no longer need to censor yourself,
yes, because
you're not afraid of being excommunicated or losing the spirit or whatever challenges or threats you get for leaving the tribe, then you can communicate and talk about it. But you are, and I know this because of experience in the past 2 weeks, you are demonized. I have been demonized to the extent that I can't even express what LDS women have said about me, because I am not afraid to challenge those authoritative directives. And so those women healers know the boundaries. And so they keep within those boundaries. When I knew it wasn't true anymore,
yeah,
I
full integrity.
The language.
Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I get so excited about this.
I do too, obviously.
But for those of us who were trained in this, and like I'm in Hawaii and I'm getting this training, and I'd already explored multiple modalities before that, and I'm not hanging my shingle and I'm not taking clients. I just wanted to learn it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to learn it for myself and my family, and for whoever the Spirit sent to me, which has happened. I don't charge for it, and I have nothing against charging for it, but it's not my main business or my main focus. So I'm learning all this and I'm feeling all this, and I'm in this meditation garden, and I was like, I've never felt so alive. I've never felt so connected. And to me, it's very feminine. It's the essence of Mother Earth. It's the ever-present feminine essence of the Holy Spirit. It's ever-present. It's irrevocably linked to who I am. And to think of going before a council of men and getting the okay for me to be able to practice what my soul has called me to, where I feel loved up, where I feel totally connected to God and humanity, lit up, like that just feels so to just, bureaucratize, or I believe they've commoditized it with those statements when they're kind of coming back and trying to say that we're trying to commoditize healing, right?
Yes.
So that's the irony in this. It's like, well, you want tithes to support and sustain the movement of this church and the kingdom and all the priesthood administration and building of temples and all these things. And that's beautiful. But on the flip side, women can't, not only have we been discouraged from practicing healing gifts outside of, approved, whatever, church, whatever. But like if there's you went and got trained, you got certified, there was an investment, it's your time, it's your resources. And now you can't charge for it, or it's priestcraft.
Yeah.
And I think priestcraft is another thing entirely when you're accusing us of this. But yet we have to hand over all of our gifts, our time, our talents, our money, our energy, our focus to build this thing that's now discouraging me from being in my sovereignty and expressing gifts that could heal the whole world, not just the people in the church. Because if we took a percentage of the qualified people to give healing in this context, which is worthy male priesthood holders sitting down and giving you a healing blessing, or if, let's just say people praying for you, it probably has the same effect. What percentage of people on this earth right now are going to heal the whole world with that kind of official capacity? And I think it's termed properly performed.
Properly performed and worthy. Remember, in order to be a worthy priesthood holder, you have to be a 100% tithe payer. So one thing that I wanted to point out here, that for me, what I call priestcraft, and is anything that denies or excludes us from having a direct connection to our innate gifts and into our rights as human beings, that also requires money for our spiritual advancement. That's what I call priestcraft. Anything that interrupts, limits, or denies us access to our innate spiritual gifts.
Yeah, that's powerful. I have talked to a number of women about energy healing throughout the years who are, either evangelical, Protestant, Catholic, LDS, whatever. And they're like, yeah, I'm doing this thing, but I can't really talk about it. But I'm doing it anyway. Yeah. Or my priesthood leaders wouldn't be okay with this, or my pastor would think it's weird, but I'm doing it anyway. And it's like, when are we going to open up and be open?
Yeah.
And challenge that ecclesiastical, sort of hierarchy around like what healing can or cannot be, why it's approved or not approved, when it's working, when these tools actually work. Couldn't we bring that back to the congregation, if you will, and say, hey, let's try this on, and it's okay. Like, here's absolute freedom to go find healing however you want to find it. We're not going to try to control that for you.
Well, I think there's something definitely wrong when it feels so right for us to follow those inspirations and to follow those heart pangs that are saying this way. You've got this gift. Here are the marks of results that say this is the evidence that you're on the right track, but it gets interrupted because it's not allowed in the church. Imagine a community, a religion that encouraged us to have those spiritual gifts, that helped us to actually access those gifts, to give us some kind of a pathway to upgrade our consciousness and to know what our own unique gifts are and to practice them freely, understanding that there is a gap in growth and learning and skill.
Right.
Instead of just shutting it down and saying, this is because we don't understand it, it must be from the devil. And because we are the arbiters of healing and we are the priesthood and we are the men, and then we will be the ones that will and then protect the fold. And
we know God's will better than all of you. Yes. In that regard. We're the So I just want to read this because I reached out to a friend, and I'm not going to mention her name. I respect her. She actually has organized conferences that have grown to be quite large, many thousand strong. She's an active Mormon member of the church, and she's been asked to she's gotten the tap from her priesthood leaders on the shoulder about changing the name and different things. And I know you do, because we talked about this before. People who've literally been called, like you were, into your bishop's office, and I understand you're doing this questionable practice, and this is
fellowship,
and they've getting disfellowship, going through church disciplinary councils. And also, like, I know women who have helped. I know one woman in particular who's helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people break through depression and all kinds of things through the quantum mechanics of energy work. And I don't remember the name of her modality, but she was called in by her ecclesiastical leader. It was actually her stake president. For those of you who aren't familiar with how Mormon leadership works, you have the bishop is over your local congregation, and then there are many bishops. There's a stake president over many bishops or many congregations. So her stake president went from her bishop up to her stake president, who he was contacted by general church leadership. I don't know who. but she was called in and asked to give over her temple recommend. Now, for an active, faithful Latter-day Saint woman or man, to give over their temple recommend is like giving over your salvation. It's like, I've made these covenants in the temple to, all these markers of obedience, and I'm consecrating my life to God. And so if I don't keep those temple covenants, or if those are in question, I'm not going to make it. I'm in hot water with God. Like, oh my gosh. So she's tearfully, being obedient and giving over her recommend. So she had to make a hard choice. Do I keep practicing and helping these thousands of people who themselves are active members of the church and aren't going to their bishops and leaders to talk about it because they're afraid how it's going to be perceived? Or do I obey my church leader and forfeit my temple blessings and rights and privileges? So guess what she chose?
She probably chose to keep her temple recommend.
She did.
Shut down her gift.
So she repented and she stopped her practice, and all those thousands of people that she'd helped who wished they could have repeat sessions with her. She said, I'm choosing to be obedient to God, is how she put it, not her leaders. And I'm sorry, I won't be practicing anymore. But I just want to read, coming back to my friend who I reached out to, who you and I both know her. She's quite prolific in the space of holding, bringing energy healers together. And energy healing is just an all-encompassing term for multiple modalities that assist people on the quantum level, we'll just say, right? It's not typical drugs and talk therapy, we'll just say, it's alternative. She said, I know a lot of people who don't agree with me on both sides, but I want you to know that I feel so much peace about it. And that means that she's had to backtrack and bring it to a different space. Energy medicine practitioners who are true professionals follow and adhere to a strict code of ethics. And I agree with her on this, and I know you do too. So we're not bashing her. We're totally agreeing with her. They would never make promises of miracles or make claims like they are referring to in the handbook. Real professionals have disclaimers on their websites as they are required to by law. They follow the laws in their states. They have invested heavily in their education and certifications and have licenses that are required in their appropriate fields. So the wording in the General Church Handbook, if you look carefully, looks like it is to weed out those who do not adhere to a code of ethics. Unfortunately, in every industry, there are some bad apples. Just because you call yourself an energy healer doesn't mean that you're honest, treat people with dignity, and respect or behave professionally. This is why I am so grateful to be working with a team of scientists who are changing this. More information is coming. It's all very exciting, data, research, clinical studies. And I agree with her, even my work that I do with like essential oils. To everybody else, that was woo-woo, foo-foo, pseudo, whatever. But I know it's chemistry. I know there's scientific back studies. I know there's clinical research, right? But even if I didn't know that, my intuitive feminine soul is like, this is beautiful. This brings me closer to God. It tunes me back into myself. So I want you to respond to that, because when I texted this to you, you said something quite insightful. You're like,
I agree with her in that, but still they have made a blanket statement over all of it being energy healing. And I would agree with her that there are quacks in energy healing, but there are quack contractors, there are quack mechanics, there are quack doctors. In every field, you're going to find somebody who might manipulate you or really let you down, or just really be a poorly skilled person at their craft. We all are subject to something like that happening. That the church feels the need that they have to warn members who are adult members, by the way, who should be sovereign authorities of their own life, why they should have to put in there where they're allowed to get healing. And
it's like a micromanagement.
Right. Cause them to feel that you are so codependent on us that we have to have these strict rules so that you can obey them, again, with that scrupulous mind, thinking, oh, maybe I could look at this handbook of instructions and find just one more thing that I might not be aligned with, so that I can qualify to feel God's love. And so I think a handbook of instruction with rules on how to wear your clothes, how many earrings to wear, what to do with your underwear, if you should get a elective surgery for sterilization, if you should get a vasectomy, hair piercing.
ear piercing, hairstyles, modest clothing. Like there's a general, like I was telling you when I was searching for the exact quote, when we were looking for this energy healing quote, like where it falls in the General Church Handbooks, I'm talking hundreds of pages of rules.
Yes.
Bylines, standards, and I think this falls under the policy and guideline of medical. There's a guideline, there's a whole section on policies on moral issues, everything from abortion, abuse, and artificial insemination to the occult, to suicide, to surrogate motherhood, and transgender. And don't even get me started on that, because I really feel for the transgender community. You can't even get baptized without approval of the prophet and the first counselors, or the first presidency.
Tell them what clothes they can wear.
And what clothes you can wear and how you can identify. But then what we're talking about in energy healing is under the church handbook of medical and health policies. So why, like you said, why should a governing church body be authorities on medical health? Like, I just fear for the people who are going so letter of the law with this.
Yeah.
That they will never go down the road of alternative or energy, anything that says energy or even healing outside of a priesthood male holding his hands on their head to pronounce a blessing or people praying for them.
And these are rules of institutions that practice undue influence. When I mean undue influence is the doctrines teach that they are the authority of things that are just as simple as what I'm going to put in my mouth for food, whether I can drink, what do I do with my medicines, who should I go to for this and this and that. Any institution that has to be that specific is not designed to help you connect to the divine, because if you're connected to the divine, you already have an inner guidance that will intuitively lead you through your style, through your medical practices. It will lead you to all of the people. I know you've experienced this in your life intuitively. When you are connected without that legalistic interference, you're able to make those choices just fine on your own. Their one prime objective should be to connect you to the divine. And when they make these rules, it says you cannot get to the divine without following all of these rules.
It's what we were saying earlier when you were stuck in that loop of like, what am I not doing right? Well, maybe if I went to the handbook and looked at there was something I'm missing or some little byline, like 30, this particular thing we're reading is Church Handbook 38.7.8, for example. It's like, huge. Where does my nuanced intuition come in? And this goes back to what we were saying about all these feminine healers in the space of religion right now in hiding.
Yes.
It's no different than it was in the Dark Ages. It's no different than the witch trials.
Yeah.
It is a straight up witch hunt for a woman to have to hand over her stake president has been contacted by general church authorities. She's called in and she has to hand over her license to heaven or her temple recommend if we want to have her, because she's practicing healing work. That's
right. And other members of the church are out to hunt you down. They're the tattletales. They're the ones instructed. Let us know if you see any of these things happening within your ward, so that we can put a
stop to put the kibosh on this.
To these things. Exactly.
I had a guy that I just ran into. That's in my business. He's part of one of the leaders in the business that I am in, and he was talking about his sister. And I said, how is she? Because I knew she struggled with mental health issues, and she's actually in my parents' ward. So he's like, how is she doing? And he's like, well, do you want me to be honest? I was like, yeah. He goes, it all started when she got into energy. I'm sure you're familiar with this energy healing thing. Spoken by a true male who had a sister that became mentally ill. And because she was already mentally ill and then went into energy healing. And I'm not disparaging people who are mentally ill. I'm not perpetuating that stigma. I'm just saying she already had issues. So it was like putting fuel on the fire of someone who was already looking and searching for something and she herself was not really lined up mentally and emotionally. And so to put her into the space of being an energy healer or practitioner, she started following those really offbeat prolific Mormon people who, like I mentioned earlier, who were the quacks, who generated this like underground following, this cult-like following, because they were going way out in left field. I think if the church was to say, as in any field, there could be, the field itself is not wrong. The energy healing space itself is good. It's of the light. It helps people. We've seen the fruits. Some members of the church have seen the fruits of this. But occasionally you'll get, like in any field, someone come in who misuses that power or takes it off a beaten path. And then they bring a lot of other Mormons with them. And, and then it goes. So I kind of see where they're going with putting that in there. But like you said, they just dismiss the entire field of energy work. And when I try to tell this to believing members that I'm really close to, and they're like, oh, I just follow my own guidance. Well, like, you're not a scrupulous, you're not good for you, but like huge part and percentage of the membership are not like you. They're going to read this and go, I can't go to a practitioner. I can't go to get energy work done. And therefore they are denied an aspect to the healing that could potentially change their entire life and the quality of their life and their posterities.
I do. See, to me, all the handbook needs to say is, dear brother and sister, you are fully capable of authoring your own life. You are an intelligent being of light with grand brilliance, and you can discern between right and wrong, between good and bad, between effective and non-effective.
Yes.
How can we support you?
And what if we taught our children that from the time they're in nursery? I do. I do too. It's like, you're not broken. No. You're whole.
You don't need me to tell you every little thing, what you should do.
I'm not going to be a helicopter parent and micromanage your life. I trust you. What if we put that level of trust from the top leadership out to the field and made it a melting pot? You bring your gifts, you bring your modality, you bring your ethnicity, you bring your culture, rather than trying to subjugate people into a very rigid path that only works for a very, very small percentage of the population. I lived in New Zealand with my family. We went out there in 2015 and lived for 6 months. And we were very active in the church, and we were attending, and it was so freeing because, we were learning about the Maori culture and how they had this long-standing healing tradition, and they wore their hair differently, and they wore flip-flops to church, and some of them had tattoos, and most of them didn't prepare their talks. They just came out and spoke from their heart. And they could put the white Mormon church, Salt Lake City, into a compartment that fit for them, but they were still going to do their culture, and they were still going to be them. And I thought, we don't know how to do that as women. As women, we have lost that ancient feminine. Well, I haven't, because I'm fighting to cultivate it, but I also feel called to give women the awakened permission, however it lands in their bodies, and however they feel guided, to find that for themselves, irrespective of an institution or a committee, or you could say a pharisaical set of rules, laws, and commandments. That is so that's what's changing on the earth right now, is this feminine rising in men and women of these ancient modalities that have stood, these indigenous therapies that have stood the test of time. Yes. The Maori traditions and the African traditions. And there's so much rich ceremonies. And medicine ceremonies, shaman work. There's so much rich beauty and culture in healing. And to relegate it to a man in a suit and tie, putting his hands on your head, who's worthy, is literally like 0.001% of the population.
Yes. And we see the effectiveness. There's nothing like a pandemic to reveal the effectiveness of the priesthood, because a pandemic is not prejudice. It has is no respecter of religions. Mm-hmm. The coronavirus is no respecter of religions or faiths or anything.
Or your status before God, which some people would like to link it to.
Yes, I agree. And it's one of the points I wanted to make is that when you have to make such a rigid and huge handbook of instructions, you're creating a codependent congregation. They are underdeveloped because they won't give themselves permission to seek training outside the limitations of the doctrine.
Yeah.
And so they're not learning skills that are available. They're trying prayer, fasting, going to the temple, obeying their priesthood leaders, when they could learn about setting boundaries, about attachment styles, about different theories that we've come out
emotional
with.
Freedom technique, guided meditation,
there are
movement and body and yoga.
Here.
Yeah, exactly. A big part of my awakening in this particular domain was going through 200 hours of yoga teacher training with my daughter. And it just blew open this whole feminine embodiment and, the wisdom.
Connection to the body.
Yes. And
yeah,
I know we could make a whole, there's some really good books about this, but traditionally, if you go back to the Nicene Creed and you go all the way back to the foundations of Christianity, it was the threat to the patriarchal establishment, the Roman rule, which conflated itself with God, and the healing gifts of women. And I would add to that the wisdom teachings of women, the embodiment of the feminine. They wiped it out. They wiped it all out. And it didn't just happen with the Nicene Creed, but I mean, what was canonized, what was left? There was already the erasing of goddess temples and everything prior to that. But what was left for women in authority in a religious space, there was no room for it anymore. And it became this, ever since, if the Mormon church claims to be I'm going to make a super bold statement, but if the Mormon church claims to be a restoration church, which it does, restoring the fullness of the gospel, restoring the fullness of Jesus and what he was teaching, it's less administerial as it is this beauty of love
and connection.
And if you don't have equal representation in visibility and voice between the masculine and the feminine, it's going to break down. And we're seeing that happen.
It's a broken system. Absolutely.
We're not saying there's not beauty there. Anyone listening who's faithful and whatever, I'm not saying that there's not beauty and power and so much good in the system, in the institution. But when you really get to the heart of the individual soul and that sovereignty piece, if that isn't encouraged, and if there isn't inclusivity and the marginalized coming to the middle and being included, and that includes everything from, the racist teachings that have been perpetuated and LGBTQ stuff and the marginalization of women and the silencing. And when we can put all of the marginalized people in the melting pot like Jesus did, that will be the restoration. It won't be policies and procedures and a handbook and, however many hundreds of pages and sections in the administrative function of an institution. It will be, I love you. Do you love you? I love me. Do you love you? Yeah, great. Let's all love each other. And I know that sounds very childlike.
It is that simple, though.
But it really is that simple. And what is authority? By someone, okay, I understand the theology of giving someone the authority to administer. I do believe in leadership and all of that. But why is it only men given that authority? Where does the feminine empowered in her body, in her gifts, how does she have visibility and representation in this space, and not just of Mormon religion, but any? We're seeing an uprising and an organic movement happening between these awakened pods. And at some point, they're not going to be able to keep silent anymore. The thousands and thousands and thousands of women healers in religion who want to be obedient, who want to be faithful, who want to help people outside their religion and who want to stay in an integrity and alignment with their religion of origin, but they have this other thing. It's
unfortunately
powerful and beautiful, and they don't know how to reconcile them. And so they're in hiding.
Well, yeah, they suppress them and they go into hiding. But women who rise up, which is what you're doing, which is what I am doing, are demonized in patriarchal systems.
Yeah. I know that there are people that are watching this who literally think you and I are heretics and we've been deceived.
Oh, I've been told that many times.
And I just have to.
Has already been silenced. And so
exactly.
Anything without cannot convince me that I am not on the right path, because I continue to upgrade my ability to love and include and to create space for people who are marginalized. And so how can that be a bad thing? You cannot tell me that the worth of my soul is all determined by whether I can obey this really tight rule book.
Yeah.
And by the way, that handbook of instructions is used many times as to override scriptures, past prophets, everything.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's this evolving
judged by.
Yes. So we are held accountable to these standards, and it's like, this will make or break. I mean, I'm talking very, black, white right now, but like it makes or breaks. Like if you can't adhere to these things, like they'll say things in the surgical sterilization section, for example, right? Where it's like, it's just like, we discourage the use of, elective surgical sterilization, but it's up to you. And it's like, so they throw in the sovereignty piece as an afterthought, but we discourage it. So you're like thinking in your mind, well, if they discourage it and they're speaking for God and they're God's church, maybe I shouldn't do this thing. Right. And so it just conflates the sovereignty.
It makes it so vague and blurred.
Oh, gray. And like, how do I even...
And why do I even need permission to make this choice for myself?
Yeah. And why do
I need permission?
Yeah. There's so much there. I want you to find your quote that you posted on Facebook while we're kind of wrapping things up. If you can access it while I...
Which one is it?
The one that kind of went a little bit viral when you were asked by Radio Free Mormon and Bill Reel that you read, that you posted on Facebook. Because both you and I mean, when it comes down to it, we have such a deep love for the beautiful people who it seems like we might be speaking out against, but we're not speaking out against the people.
No. We want it to be better for them.
We want this very conscious inclusivity and collaboration, and to do away with the micromanagement and to put the trust and the power back to the individual so they can exercise self-sovereignty. And that's like graduating from kindergarten and going into college and having your parents say, go. We trust you. We've given you everything that you need. You have a great moral compass. You're lined up, you're powerful, you're whole, you're beautiful, go. If that was the messaging versus the bureaucratized subsections that you got to hunt for, and gosh, what about hypnosis? Oh, that's in there. What about medical marijuana? That's in there. What about organ and tissue donations and transplants? That's in there, right? Why do I need to go there when I'm lined up in my sovereignty? So I think that's where you and I really... That's why I started my podcast, Women Seeking Wholeness, because I was like, we're already whole. Why don't we have to seek for it? Like, even the title itself seems like an oxymoron. Yeah. But we're searching and we're searching and searching for something outside of us rather than claiming this wholeness. And it's so interesting that her book, Carol Tuttle, is Remembering Wholeness, because we already are whole. We've forgotten it.
I agree.
And so when we go to an institution that keeps reminding us we're not whole, we're broken, we have to keep repenting and get on that hamster wheel of doing all the right things to earn our salvation or to be worthy of it, it can create such a dissonance in our divine soul.
And a disconnect from the divine. Direct disconnect.
Exactly. Heavenly Mother, Heavenly Father, God, Jesus, whatever you want to call it, Spirit, they can't come through if we hold the belief that we're so broken that we're past fixing or healing or saving. And we really don't need, there's nothing to heal. So when we're talking about energy healing, it's the reclamation of your energy alignment. And it's the reclamation of your own wholeness. And when you switch that belief to you're already whole, you're already complete, then everything shifts around it. We don't need religious leaders telling us to repent. We can feel what is dissonant and we can work that out and we can go to God, and we don't need to, get I know this sounds so heretical to Mormons, so just bear with me, but we really don't even need a recommend a temple recommend to earn our salvation. It's done. That's where grace comes in. We are already at one. Why would Christ have died and gone through that whole sacrificial process in whatever belief system, whether you're Christian or not, to bring us back to the oneness, to tell us the message, you're already one. These people killed me because I was teaching about love.
And I was empowering them.
And I was trying to
brilliance.
Yes. And I was trying to tell them the kingdom's within, and I was trying to give them their own power and potentiality. Exactly. And I was trying to tell them, like, they're already there. They're already, and he's like, and I was just using myself as an example of what's possible, but they killed me because it was heretical. Yeah. Because they had a certain set of rules and standards that I was breaking.
You cannot control people who think independently.
No.
And so you have to control the thoughts.
So I'm so passionate about it now that I just cannot even, I knew yesterday I had to speak up. So why don't you go ahead and read your post, and we'll kind of close out with that, with some parting thoughts.
So this is kind of long, and it's also take into consideration it's written by someone who has removed the church from being any kind of authority in my life. However, I'm very connected to a lot of people who are in the church. I would love to help make it a better place for them. And I'm really concerned. My whole purpose in my life is to help people identify the patterns and beliefs that limit them from their divine potential. And so when I see something like this, I get passionate, and Mama Bear comes out, and I'm saying, not on my watch. And I will have the words. And so these are my words.
Yes. Love it.
LDS authorities. What a disappointment. When you updated your policy handbook of instructions for the leadership of the church, you discouraged members from participating in energy healing. Your policy minimalized the definition of energy healing to the supernatural or magical. Are you so out of touch that you cannot see the advancements throughout the world in the field of quantum science? Why would you abuse your power and your influence to deny your congregants the right to discern for themselves how to go about their own health and healing? To dismiss the field of energy healing includes hundreds of modalities, both ancient and modern, that are being tested, researched, and validated in their respective fields. Yoga, meditation, acupuncture, sound healing, craniosacral work, polarity work, emotional freedom technique, hypnotherapy, breath work, plant medicine, all fall under the field of energy work. Energy work is defined as modalities that help to balance the energy throughout the body to alleviate stress, ailments, and disease, including psychological imbalances. It's not enough to dismiss the validity of these modalities, but then you include the idea that it's wrong to pay money to experience these forms of healing. It alludes that they are some form of priestcraft or diabolical deception. What is supernatural and magical is your emphasis on the power of patriarchal priesthood to bind family ties in the afterlife, to channel patriarchal blessings, the laying on of hands to bestow spirits and blessings, to have visions, to perform ordinances for the dead, to have dead visit in visions for the purpose of doing their ordinance work, and forms of bibliomancy. Then you relegate these supernatural gifts to the priesthood, wherein only the male body of Latter-day Saints may perform these supernatural procedures. Even more disturbing is that you require 10% of one's income to fully participate in the LDS experience in the temple and with certain callings and privileges in the church. You must pay the church 10% to be found a worthy priesthood holder who can perform these ordinances, powers, and blessings. Surely you can see that to some, this appears more like priestcraft than paying facilitators to perform their skills. So I go on explaining that the church is kind of a supernatural church to begin with. Every
religion at its foundation had a supernatural or a mystical aspect to its inception, right? Like,
yes.
And supernatural is another one of those words that you could link with so many other occult and everything. And actually under occult in the handbook, under the occult, it gives the word mysticism. And I'm like, I want to go up to Church HQ and explain mysticism.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
We should all be mystics.
Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon religion, was a mystic. Mysticism is, it's direct experience with the beloved or the divine. Mysticism is union. It's individual union, individual soul union with God. That's mysticism. So if that's being labeled as the occult, what was that?
It also links to personal inquiry, to be in a state of curiosity and wonder about all things.
Yes.
So that Spirit can inform you and teach you.
Yeah, because when you're in a closed system, all the answers are there. Why would you need to be a mystic? It's all put in front of you. But then you realize there's some stuff that's not. And that's why I started studying the Divine Feminine and Mary Magdalene and Ancient Mother and the Earth, because that was not in the approved curricula. It was missing. So I became
your heart was calling you to that.
Yes. And it was like you with, learning about these modalities. Like I knew that in my heart and soul, that was my path to go learn that. Mm-hmm. And I could see that some of it was at odds with the patriarchy, and I didn't know how to reconcile them. And finally, I just gave myself permission to extrapolate what served and what aspects resonated, and to put the other to the side, because they're not me. They're not edifying me. I'm not feeling the fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
Some aspects I am and some I'm not, but I get to have that soul sovereignty and that freedom to take what aligns and bring it into my space and my practice. And this is my body. This is my life, my set of trauma and experiences and everything. And giving myself that spiritual freedom, that emancipation from a system or an institution has made all the difference in how happy I am. And people can't reconcile that. How can you be happy if you're not sacrificing for this institution? I'm like, well,
you're not keeping your covenants and giving everything, your focus, your attention, your resources, your talents,
all of your time
to the institution
and the people in your ward and neighborhood.
Right.
Versus no, I unplugged from that a while ago, Wendy, like at least 10 or 15 years ago. I decided my mission was bigger than just my community calling in my church, and that I had things to say and learn and do. And I know you did this too. Like even before I had my awakening around like the Divine Feminine stuff, I still knew that there were things that were not in this very narrow approved curricula of spiritual education. That there was it's a big world out there. It's a cosmos. It's it's a multiverse. So am I going to just like narrow it down to a trickling stream of, Baraccarized theology, honestly, that doesn't include Mother, that mentions her and then drops her and won't talk about her anymore? And that for me was what broke it all open. It's like, no, she's not forgotten over here. She might be forgotten in this space of Mormon theology. Like
she's very much alive outside.
She's very alive when you start to network and meet these like-minded souls, these sisters, these feminine mystics and male mystics who have found that.
And touched in with the divine feminine. As a man, that's a beautiful thing all in of itself.
Totally. So, I kind of walked into this knowing that we would go a little bit off the beaten path in terms of, we'd probably trigger some people. And I'm just past like people pleasing around it, because I know there are people who are suffering, literally suffering, who need these modalities, who need these gifts of the earth, who need this feminine, ancient wisdom, teaching, healing arts, these indigenous therapies, who will read this. And if they're healthy, they will go, oh, well, I can take that and put it to the side. Not knowing that the true people that are suffering that want to stay obedient can't do that. The true people who are suffering and who are trying to be obedient will look at that as a black and white and say, oh, I can't do that because my leader, I'm trying to be obedient. I'm trying to, be worthy, and I'm trying to, heal myself spiritually and qualify. So if I do this, I'm going against policy. And that's something I'm not good with.
To me. And
I'm going to be denied a blessing that will further, delay my healing.
Yes.
So the more obedient I am, the more I stay true to the alignment of these policies and procedures and the counsel of my leaders, the quicker I'll get healed.
And that is at the exact antithesis of a sovereign mind, right there. You cannot access your own innate pool of wisdom and in an unexhaustible, sustainable, renewable pool of wisdom with endless supply to you when you are bound up in these doctrines and rules and stipulations and expected to capitulate to a system that denies you access to those innate gifts. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Can you grow in this environment? Yes. But at some level, you're going to hit a ceiling. And when you hit that ceiling, you have to trust and go inward and be willing to lose friends, to be called an apostate,
right?
To be demonized, to hurt people's feelings in order to stop betraying yourself, because your heart wisdom will not be quiet. It will haunt you until you are willing to wake up and grow and continue breathing more and more truth and expand your consciousness to envelop the concepts of love that do not have these rigid limitations that we are taught are required of God. A God that has those rigid limitations that make it such a challenge to reach him is not a God worth my worship.
Yeah, if there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get loved and feel love and be worthy to be in the presence and pluck the fruit of the love of God. Like, no, we already have it. We're already eating it. We just don't know it. We're veiled from it because we're buying into the program that we're not worthy of it. I want to just kind of end with this whole word official, because as you were just very beautifully and eloquently articulating, your fire and enthusiasm for this whole regimented way of spirituality. It got me thinking.
I'm so passionate about it.
I am too. I can't handle it. But you were mentioning this, and I was thinking, that's really, especially as I dove into the Gnostic Gospels, which during the Nicene Creed could have been canonized, but were driven into Apocrypha and buried and burned.
Thank goodness.
And what's beautiful about those apocryphal writings is that, they could have changed the course of men and women in egalitarian authority and leadership in church, but irrespective of that, they were buried. And after all of the major Christian religions and world religions were formed already, they were excavated in the Nag Hammadi library, in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, rather, and put into, codified in the right after World War II, including the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Thomas and Philip. So in those writings, we get a whole different picture of what Jesus was teaching.
Yes.
How women, especially Mary Magdalene, were given co-authority, and how he broke every rule and tradition in the official handbook, if you will.
Which is why he was a threat.
What was that?
Which is why he was a threat.
Which is why he was a threat and ultimately killed by the establishment, because he just wanted to teach people love and to go within those wisdom teachings. And that did not bode well for the establishment. It was an empirical empire. It was empirical. It was an empire. And so his radical revolutionary way of going against that, in a very loving way, by the way, not in an angry picketing way, just like we started this conversation, It was inquiry. It was going within. It was questions. It was parables. It was nuance. It was not black and white. It was the beauty and the affirmation of you, the kingdom's within you. It's already there. It doesn't come by observation. It's not outside you.
Yes.
And so that was labeled heresy, and I'm really glad it made it into the canonized scripture. However, we have all these other teachings that have been established by science, by carbon dating, as ancient texts that were written at the same time that these Christian writings were written, but they were not canonized. They were driven out as heretical because that empirical government wanted to stay in power, which is the Roman Catholic rule. They wanted to stay in power, and so they wiped out a lot of what we could have kept in with individual sovereignty, inner authority, and direct connection of the individual to the divine without needing a middle institution or governing establishment, right? So
I agree.
It's like, whoa, how is that playing out in our day?
Well, it's people like you and I that are called to restore things like that. Those things were delegitimized for a purpose, because people who understand their own power and their own divine, their connection to the divine, their direct connection to the divine, when they understand their innate power, they're very difficult to control. And so that these records were kept somewhere and hidden and unearthed. It saddens me when a religion who declares that they're seeking for truth does not
won't even look at it,
give them any weight.
The Harvard Divinity School has really broken it apart. And Dr. Karen King, she's one of my heroines. She has made her translation of the Gospel of Mary her life's work.
Wow.
And she's got a PhD and she works at Harvard Divinity School, and she's very much a theologian, but she's also an academic and a scholar. So yeah, I have some real thoughts around it, and I am writing about it, and eventually it will come out in its full context and entirety. But I love these discussions, Wendy, and I love bringing like minds into this whole, we're not anti-men, we're not even anti-church. We're just hey, it's time to heal, planet. It's time to heal, church body. And it's not going to be at the level that we've been doing for 200 years.
Right.
Because there's a lot of sick and depressed people.
Not afraid to call out systems that hurt people. That, again, that is my purpose. If there is some system, technology, or technique that limits us from our direct connection to the divine, I am not afraid. I will call it out without any apology.
Yeah.
And I will be an advocate for us finding pathways to be directly connected to that divine, to know that inner wisdom within, because when we are all connected, then the entire world is evolving at a rapid pace, evolving in the direction of truth and light and love.
Right. Love it. That's the perfect place to wrap up. I don't even know how long we went. I'm scared. I have to break this up into 2 parts. But
everybody watches it all the way through.
We got it. We got the full scope. So thank you, Wendy, my friend and soul sister. And I just honor you for your work as a transition coach. You guys can find her on wendyjensen.com, and Wendy with an I. And see what she's doing, all the good she's doing in the world. And you and I go way back, 10 years, 12 years, 10 years. I don't even know.
12 years, I think.
Yeah, 12 years.
You figure that out.
And it's been interesting that we've had this parallel journey, even though we haven't really been communicating a lot. It's just this awakening that we're very aware of that shouldn't necessarily be a violent uprising, but it needs to be, as you said, things need to be called out. There needs to be passion. There needs to be wild, fierce feminine going on. There needs to be healthy male structure saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't aligning. And it's the more that we open these conversations up, not as an affront, but just as an invitation to leadership to say, look, what if you came to the table and got educated? So that when you're making these general blanket statements, you're not marginalizing people who have been very served, edified, healed, and brought closer to Christ through these mechanisms. And that's my intent, is to open up an invitation and a conversation to, I guess you could say, the powers that be, the ruling class of religion, to say, look, there's more. And when you give people their own divine, I loved what you said about the mission statement of maybe you can say it again I could say we need to wrap up, but that statement that you said about what if, it reminds me of I have a dream.
Yeah. What if every religion's,
every religion
directive is to connect us to the divine, rather than to make these rules and make us codependent on their counsel and on their rules and on their view of the world and things.
Yeah. And then that every human is beautifully already connected. Yes. There's nothing they can do to jeopardize their quote unquote salvation or eternal cohabitation with God, being in his presence and her presence. There's nothing that can ever. The only thing that separates that is personal choice. It's not.
And indoctrination.
And indoctrination and programming that makes you think in a warped way that somehow you're disconnected from that. A Course in Miracles.
You have to earn it.
Yes, that you have to earn it. So that's one of the reasons I love A Course in Miracles is that's their whole thing. They boiled it down to there's love and there's fear and there's connection and disconnection, period. The only thing that separates us from God is fear, and anything that promotes fear of, oh my gosh, am I doing it right? Is this right? Did I follow this rule? What am I doing wrong? That's fear. And that actually, by spiritual osmosis, separates you from God. And so when you go into, I am love, I am loved. There's scriptures all over the place that say there's nothing that you can do to separate yourself from the love of God, but we don't emphasize those scriptures. I think it's in Timothy or something. Like, so yeah, if we could just end this discussion on a high note of like, you already are everything you're seeking.
Yeah. And if you are being called into the field to help heal others, and your heart is beating in that direction,
Please, we need you.
Do not let anything stop you in that path. The world needs you, and
humanity needs your gifts. Yes,
and trust that the Spirit will guide you. It will lead you to the people, the programs, and the opportunities for you to grow, and you will be a powerful force for good in the world.
Yes, and trust yourself. You'll know the quacks from the real. Like, you don't need somebody's permission. Like, you have that discernment. So honor your gifts and bring it, because you're like, yes, we need it. We need it. We need what you have. Thank you, Wendy, once again.
Thank you. It's been awesome.
You deserve a medal if you've listened this far. Thank you for sharing this. If it feels right for you to share this with your friends, please do so. And again, go to my YouTube channel. You can just find it with the same name as this podcast title, Women, Healers, and Churches. And, just to clarify, I'm not calling out like specific church leaders. I'm calling out handbook policies, which are authorless and nameless. It's just time that we open up the conversation, the language, not just within my religion of origin, Mormonism, but just to delineate like priesthood, male, hierarchical, patriarchal power, and the spiritual gifts of women and how they can be symbiotic and not mutually exclusive. So, yep, I'm going to keep talking out about it. I've also just started blogging again for the first time in years. And so you can find some more thoughts I had as we finished up our recording. Literally like that night, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much to say on this. So I did a little blog post, and you can find that on my website, and I'll put that link in the show notes too when that goes live. And please share this with your friends. I would say your mystic friends, your feminine mystic friends, and healers and intuitives and empaths who need the divine permission from other women. Have a glorious week, and we will talk to you next time on Women Seeking Wholeness.